What is wisdom? Why do we long for it? How do we and where do we find it? What is it?
Intelligence is what you use to solve your problems, as I was just describing. Rationality is how you use your intelligence to overcome the problems of self-deception that emerge when you're trying to solve your problems. So it's that meta problem. And then the issue is, do you have just one kind of knowing? I think you have multiple ways of knowing, and therefore you have multiple rationalities. And so wisdom is to coordinate those rationalities so that they are optimally constraining and affording each other. So in that way, wisdom is rationally self-transcending rationality.
Right. So life is a kind of process where you jump from rationality to rationality and pick up a village of rationalities along the way that then turns into wisdom.
Yes, if properly coordinated.
You mentioned framing.
Yes.
So what is framing? Is it a set of assumptions you bring to the table in how you see the world, how you reason about the world? Yeah, how you understand the world?
So it depends what you mean by assumptions. If by assumption you mean a proposition, representational, or rule, I think that's much more downstream from relevance realization. I think relevance realization refers to, again, constraints on how you are paying attention. And so for me, talking about framing is talking about this process you're doing right now of salience landscaping. What's salient to you? And how is what's salient constantly shifting in a sort of a dynamic tapestry? And how are you shaping yourself to the way that salience landscaping is aspectualizing the world, shaping it into aspects for interaction? For me, that is a much more primordial process than any sort of beliefs we have. And here's why. If we mean by beliefs, a representational proposition, then we're in this very problematic position. Because then we're trying to say that propositions are ultimately responsible for how we do relevance realization. And that's problematic because representations presuppose relevance realization. So I represent this as a cup. The number of properties it actually has, and that I even have epistemic access to, is combinatorially explosive. I select from those a subset and how they are relevant to each other insofar as they are relevant for me. This doesn't have to be a cup. I could be using it as a hat. I could use it to stand for the letter V, all kinds of different things. I could say this was the 10th billion object made in North America, right? Mm-hmm. Representations presuppose relevance realization. They are, right? They are therefore dependent on it, which means relevance realization isn't bound to our representational structures. It can be influenced by them, but they are ultimately dependent on relevance realization.
Let's define stuff. Relevance realization.
Yes.
What are the inputs and the outputs of this thing? What is it? What are we talking about?
What we're talking about is how you are doing something very analogous to evolution. So if you think about that adaptivity isn't in the organism or in the environment, but in a dynamical relation. And then what does evolution do? It creates variation, and then it puts selective pressure. And what that does is that changes the niche constructions that are available to a species. It changes the morphology. You also have a loop. It's your sensory motor loop. And what's constantly happening is there are processes within you that are opening up variation and also processes that are putting selection on it. And you're constantly evolving that sensory motor loop. So you might call your cognitive fittedness, which is how you're framing the world, is constantly evolving and changing. I can give you two clear examples of that. One, right? Your autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic. The sympathetic system is biased to trying to interpret as much of reality as threat or opportunity. The parasympathetic is biased to trying to interpret as much of the environment as safe and relaxing, and they are constantly doing opponent processing. There's no little man in you calculating your level of arousal. There's this dynamic coupling, opponent processing between them that is constantly evolving your arousal. Similarly, your attention, you have the default mode network, task network. The default mode network is putting pressure on you right now to mind wander, to go off, to drift, right? And then the task focused network is selecting out of those possibilities the ones that will survive and go into. And so you're constantly evolving your attention.
Okay, so there's a natural selection of ideas that a bunch of systems within you are generating, and then you use the natural selection. What is the selector, the object that you're interacting with, the glass? Relevance realization, once again, you just describe how it happens.
Yes.
You didn't describe what the hell it is. So what's the goal? What are we talking about? So relevance realization is how you interact with things in the world
So,
to make sense of
yes.
why they matter, what they mean to you, to your life.
Yes. And notice the language you just used. You're starting to use the meaning in life language.
Good or bad?
That's good.
Okay.
That's good. So what does that evolution of your sensory motor loop do? It gives you, and here I'll use the term from Merleau-Ponty, it gives you an optimal grip on the world. So let's use your visual attention again. Okay, here's an object. How close should I be to it? Is there a right?
That's what you want to do with it.
Exactly. So you have to evolve your sensory motor loop in order to get the optimal grip that actually creates the affordance of you getting to a goal that you're trying to get to.
Yeah, but you're describing physical goals of manipulating objects, but this applies. The task, the process of relevance realization is not just about getting a glass of water and taking a drink.
No.
It's about falling in love.
Yeah, of course.
What else is there?
Well, there's obvious
between those two options.
I can show you how you're optimally gripping in an abstract cognitive domain. Okay?
Yeah.
So a mammal goes by and most people will say there's a dog. Now, why don't they say, they might, but typically, probabilistically, they'll say there's a dog. They could say there's a German Shepherd, there's a mammal, there's a living organism, there's a police dog. Why that? Why there? Why do they stop? Eleanor Rush called these basic level. Well, what you find is that's an optimal grip because it's getting you the best overall balance between similarity within your category and difference between the other categories. It's allowing you to properly fit to that object insofar as you're setting yourself up to, well, I'm getting as many of the similarities and differences I can on balance because they're in a trade-off relationship that I need in order to probably interact with this mammal. That's optimal grip, not right. It's at the level of your categorization.
You evolve these models of the world around you, and on top of them, you do stuff like you build representations, like you said.
Yes.
What's the salience landscape? Salience meaning attention landscape.
So salience is what grabs your attention or what results from you directing your attention. So I clap my hands, that's salient, it grabs your attention. Your attention is drawn to it, that's bottom up. But I can also say your left big toe, and now it's salient to you because you directed your attention towards it, that's top down. And again, opponent processing going on there. So whatever stands out to you, what grabs your attention, what arouses you, what triggers at least momentarily some affect towards it, that's how things are salient. What salience, I would argue, is how a lot of unconscious relevance realization makes information relevant to working memory. That's when it now becomes online for direct sensory motor interaction with the world.
So you think the salience landscape, the ocean of salience, extends into the subconscious mind?
I think relevance does, but I think when relevance is recursively processed, relevance realization, such that it passes through sort of this higher filter of working memory and has these properties of being globally accessible and globally broadcast, then it becomes the thing we call salience. Look, that's really good evidence. There's really good evidence from my colleague at U of T, University of Toronto, Lynn Hasher, that that's what working memory is. It's a higher order relevance filter. That's why things like chunking will get way more information through working memory, because it's basically monitoring how much relevance realization has gone into this information. Usually you have to do an additional kind of recursive processing. And that tells you, by the way, when do you need consciousness? When do you need that working memory and that salience landscaping? It's when you're facing situations that are highly novel, highly complex, and very ill-defined, that require you to engage working memory.
Okay, got it. So relevance realization is in part the thing that constructs that basic level thing of a dog. When you see a dog, you call it a dog, not a German Shepherd, not a mammal,
Yeah.
not a biological meat bag. It's a dog. Wisdom.
Yes.
So what is wisdom? If we return, I think as part of that, we got to relevance realization. And then wisdom is a accumulation of rationalities. He described the rationality as a kind of starting from intelligence, a bunch of puzzle solving, and then rationality is like the meta problem of puzzle solving, and then what wisdom is the meta problem of puzzle solving.
Yes, in the sense that the meta problem you have when you're solving your puzzles is that you can often fall into self-deception. You can misframe.
Self-deception, right?
Right. So whereas knowledge overcomes ignorance, wisdom is about overcoming foolishness. If what we mean by foolishness is self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior, which I think is a good definition of foolishness. And so what you're doing is you're doing this recursive relevance realization. You're using your intelligence to improve the use of your intelligence. And then you're using your rationality to improve the use of your rationality. That's that recursive relevance realization I was talking about a few minutes ago. Think about a wise person. They come into highly, often messy, ill-defined, complex situations, usually where there's some significant novelty. And what can they do? They can zero in on what really matters, what's relevant, and then they can shape themselves, salience landscaping, to intervene most appropriately to that situation as they have framed it. That's what we mean by a wise person. And that's how it follows out of the model I've been presenting to you.